On this episode of This Week in Space, we're looking into alternative housing on Mars, inside mushrooms, that is. Yep, you heard me right. We're a couple of fun guys. Stay with us.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is This Week in Space, episode number 132, recorded on October 11th, 2024, Living in Martian Mushrooms. Hello and welcome to another episode of This Week in Space, the Living in Martian Mushrooms edition. I'm Rod Pyle, as you probably know, editor-in-chief of Astro Magazine, and I'm joined, as always, by the eccentric Tarek Malik, editor-in-chief of Space.com. Hello, partner.
Hello, Rod. You know, I always love being here. You know why?
Because I'm here.
Because you're a fun guy. Right? Right? Because we're talking about mushrooms.
Further down on this lead-in.
Oh no!
Well, and just to ruin it, it's fungi, so that doesn't work quite as well. That sounds more Star Wars. Today we're diving, as you can tell, into alternative living arrangements on Mars, and that is living inside structures made of Martian mushrooms. Now, before you start clicking over to Joe Rogan to bear with me, it's an incredibly cool story, and we'll be joined in a few minutes by Dr. Lynn Rothschild of NASA's Ames Research Center to learn, here it was, how to be fun guys. Get it? It was better before you stole my thunder.
I'm sorry, you didn't tell me.
Before we start, don't forget to do us a solid and make sure to like, subscribe, and other podcast things. We'll take 5 or 10 of whatever their unit of measurement is, because we want to keep doing this show, and that way you make sure that, especially if you join Club Twit, that we can continue doing this show. We're counting on you. And now, from Barry Hayworth, our space joke of the week.
Barry!
Hey, Tarek.
Yes, Rod.
Why didn't the Russians bring the space dog back to Earth?
I don't know why.
Because they didn't like her.
Oh, that's so sad. That dog died. Oh, no.
Well, but, you know, for years I thought, oh, that poor thing, she slowly suffocated in orbit and all that. And all the most recent evidence says, no, she expired on the way up and didn't even make it to orbit because of heat.
Really?
So,
Wow, I got to read that.
Yeah,
I gotta read
that was
up
a
on
couple
it.
years ago. So unless that's been recanted, that was what I read. So I don't think she lasted long.
No,
but
no
still,
one should watch the animated film Leica. Like at
as
all.
a
It will
dog
make you
lover,
cry. Yeah.
none of us enjoy that. I mean,
Yeah.
I can think of people I wouldn't mind sending there, but not dogs.
Okay.
They're nice.
Let's
Now,
let's
I've
move,
heard that
let's move
some
on.
folks want to sick their space dogs on us when it's joke time on this show. But of course, you can help save us from ourselves and put us on joke life support. Send your best, worst, or most different space joke to us at twit@twit.tv. And now it's time for headlines.
Headline news.
I like it.
I done that all by myself. Okay. No breath of fresh air. The ISS, turns out, it's been leaking for we got all panicked when we had these other leaks, but it's been leaking at a lower level for years.
Yeah. Well, there was a report out just recently, I think about a week or two ago. We forgot to talk about it last week, but this what is it? The NASA Office of the Inspector General has cited this really super slow leak on the International Space Station as like one of its top safety risks. And
excuse me, but why did that come from the OIG instead of from NASA?
Well, you know, NASA several years ago when they first, I think they brought it back up in February of this year. They said, hey, they've got this leak. It's been going on for a while. They thought they could manage it, but now it's increased. It's like at 2.4 pounds of air per day from a historic low of 0.2 pounds per day. So, you know, I guess it's getting worse. And the fact that they haven't been able to staunch it has the Office of the Inspector General a bit concerned because it just keeps getting worse.
Do they know where it is?
Well, I believe they were saying that it was in the Russian segment. It's
always in the Russian segment.
But see, what happened was back in February, Joel Montalbano, then the ISS program managers, was saying that, you know, the leak has increased, you know, to this 2.4 pounds a day. 2 months later, the leak increased another 50%, 3.7 pounds per day, according to the Office of the Inspector General. So they can't. It's getting worse. And
you simply light Russian cigarette, watch smoke go towards hole, then
Right,
stuff with bubble
right.
gum. So they don't like bubble gum because it's decadent.
So they've detected cracks and leaks in the Russian module that they're looking at, and it's been an issue that the aging space station, has been undergoing for quite some time. The space station, for people, I mean, these are the core modules since like 2000 that 98, even some of the earliest modules like launched up there, and so this has been an ongoing issue like for many years. But it's NASA wants to keep this going until 2030 before they bring it back to Earth, and you don't want your spaceship to leak air at all, let alone at an ever increasing rate, right? Because there's going to be leaks. There are leaks on ships. I didn't know that until recently. But
that's what bilge pumps are for. Yeah,
exactly. And they
so
repressurize over time.
Of that. Yeah.
So this is the issue. The issue is that this new report, which came out September 26th from the OIG, says, hey, it's getting worse. It's getting a lot worse, a lot faster. So something needs to be done about it. And we've seen leaks in the past. Like we had the hole in the Soyuz spacecraft, right? That they just had to putty over. I think
piece of Russian technology.
That's right. And I remember there being an air leak in a window on the U.S. segment too, if memory serves. And I could be wrong about that.
So it was like a gasket seal?
Yeah, like right along the seam or something. They were monitoring it. But it was quite a long time ago that I had heard anything about that. So I guess it's done and fixed. So huzzah, but this is just an issue where NASA has said they just have to keep working with Roscosmos to try to figure out the sources of this leak and how it's going to change, if at all, how they operate the space station.
Okay, hold on here. Hold on, NASA. Yeah, can I send you a jar of spackle that you can send over to the Russians to patch that? Okay, thanks. Oh, that's not very nice. Okay, wow, they hung up on me. Yeah, it would seem that you could kind of staunch that with almost any kind of sealant, but what the hell do I know?
Yeah.
Let's move on. I'm going to ignore the next story you have by executive fiat here because I thought this story about the Jupiter's red spot was really interesting. It's pulsing. It's pulsing.
Yeah,
it's alive.
This is like, by the way, the story Rod's skipping is the fact that there is a G4 class solar storm that spawned
we'll get to
auroras. So
I want to tell this one next.
But the scientists have used the Hubble Space Telescope. This is just from space.com, by the way. The other story also from space.com.
Hubble lives on. Yeah,
exactly. They've been studying archival data of the Great Red Spot that they've been observing it since the 19th century astronomers have. But Hubble's observations, in particular, like the high res images have shown that the red spot has been shrinking over the decades that Hubble's been up there. Right now it measures, it's like 9,000 plus miles across, although it used to be, it has been measured down to just 7,000 miles. So it's getting smaller. And they tracked all these images over time, and you can see it kind of, I don't know. You said pulsing, but they made it like sound like it's like quivering like Jello. So it'll shrink and then it bounces back, and then it shrinks and then it bounces back over time. And they don't know like what the deal is with it because right now it's called an anticyclone. This giant storm that it used to at one point be able to hold a few different Earths. I think right now it's just 2 Earths in it, and it's oblong. It's not a perfect sphere. And they think that over time, this oscillation that they're seeing is going to work itself out as it gets smaller, and it will just circularize itself and be a much more stable storm. That's still many years in the future, but it's just a really strange behavior, and it's mesmerizing to watch these videos of the Great Red Spot, like because they stacked them all up, as you can just see it quibbling about as it's trying to churn on the giant planet, and it's just a really weird fact. They have this time lapse you can see, and you see it expand and shrink along its kind of long axis, I think is what the semi-major axis is, and it's just really strange. just for strange motions on Jupiter.
Pulsing red spots. Sounds like a problem for some topical cream.
Yeah, I would say keep your health problems to yourself, Rod. This is a family podcast.
Fine. You ought to see what's in my spam folder. They keep asking me about, is your body leaking, which I guess they know how old I am. I don't need to even think about that. All right, go ahead and close with the aurora. I know you're excited about that in the solar storm. By the way, how much longer can it possibly be before the sun just lashes out and erases all life on the sunlit side of the planet? I mean, it feels like we're having kind of a weird year here, you know?
By the way, I think that's the plot of the Nicolas Cage movie Knowing, by the way.
Okay, I thought it was something else, but yeah.
Maybe it was a gamma ray burst? Could it have been that? I don't know.
Might have been. I don't remember.
Anyway, that's a weird movie, but it does hold up. It gets better with age, I think, as does Nick Cage, to be honest. But anyway,
Mr. Non-emotion, go ahead.
Yeah, we had the sun's been popping off, man. We talked a little bit about it, I think last week or in a recent episode, but NOAA, their space weather prediction group this week had an ad hoc press conference, and they issued a very rare G4 solar storm warning, only the second that they've done since 2005. And the whole cause of it was an X2 solar flare, I think on the 8th of October, that was barreling towards Earth. It was the second fastest CME of the solar cycle, this that we're in right now. And it just hit the atmosphere overnight, the magnetosphere, pardon me, and it triggered global auroras that were forecast to be as low as Alabama. And so people in California, much lower than the Arctic Circle that it normally sets. In fact, one of my writers was on an aurora hunting trip, Daisy de Bridgevik, in Norway, and she was able to catch some of it before the clouds came in. And here in New Jersey, we got too much light pollution, so we weren't able to see too much. And in fact, we couldn't even hang out in one of the darkest parts in my neighborhood because the sheriff showed up and told everyone to go home because the park was closed. And it's like, man, there's this G4 geomagnetic storm. I don't want to miss it. And yet, what are you going to do? You know, but we have
argue with the cops. Yeah,
exactly. Right. I'm not going to fight the sheriff because when you fight the law wins. Right. So, but we got amazing photos from around the world, including some of our own team members, and it's just a reminder that there are times you don't have to go all the way to the Arctic to do it. You just need a really dark sky during these geomagnetic storms. So just keep watching it. Everyone I talked to at this park was using the same Aurora app, and it's very easy to find, and it shows you where stuff is. So I didn't see a lot of power grid disruptions. That was a concern by NOAA, especially in North Carolina and Florida, which have power systems that have been greatly affected by the recent hurricanes there. They issued warnings to them to safeguard all of that. And the same was true for communication satellites, radio communications. I mean, they were all affected or had the potential to be. Not a lot of threats, though, to the astronauts in space, which is good. So,
boy, Florida sure doesn't need any more problems, huh?
Yeah. I mean, that the Hurricane Milton in particular has already delayed NASA's Europa Clipper, which we've been talking about in the past.
Right.
We're also waiting to hear on a few other missions. The Crew 8 return to Earth because they were going to splash down off the coast of Florida. So hopefully we'll get some more forward information on that maybe shortly after we wrap the podcast today.
Yeah, Lori Leshin, who's the new director at JPL, has been posting multiple updates per day of basically the view of KSC from her hotel.
Yeah, still close.
Okay, there's this much wind. The rocket's okay. The instruments are okay, but you know we're holding on launch. We'll let you know. So it's cool to have. You know, we're used to social media from NASA news outlets to some extent, not a lot, but to have the actual director of a field center tweeting live updates for stuff it's a whole new era. All right. We will be right back after this short message with Dr. Lynn Rothschild to talk about mushrooms on Mars. Stand by. This episode of This Week in Space is brought to you by US Cloud, the #1 Microsoft Unified Support replacement. US Cloud is the global leader in third-party Microsoft enterprise support, supporting 50 of the Fortune 500. Switching to US Cloud can save your business 30 to 50% on a true comparable replacement for Microsoft Unified Support. US Cloud supports the entire Microsoft stack 24/7, 365, responds faster, and resolves tickets quicker for clients all around the world. And you always talk to real humans. Check out their proven track record. They have expert-level engineers with an average of 14.9 years, and that's for break, fix, or DSE. They have 100% domestic teams. Your data never leaves the US. They have financially backed SLAs on response time, and initial ticket response averages under 4 minutes. In 2023, 94% of US Cloud's clients reported saving 1/3 or more when switching from Microsoft Unified Support to US Cloud. From Fortune 500 companies and large health systems to major financial institutions and federal agencies, US Cloud ensures that vital Microsoft systems are working for over 6 million users globally every day. And big brands trust US Cloud, including Caterpillar, HP, Aflac, Dun & Bradstreet, Under Armour, and KeyBank. Even the IT folks at Gartner have chosen US Cloud for their Microsoft support needs. A director of information technology says, and within an hour, US Cloud responded with, I want to say, 4 engineers. So not only did they bring the right guys to the call, but they brought the cavalry. I just felt like, wow, this was amazing. That was unlike anything I had experienced with Microsoft in my 8 years of being with Premier. We made the right choice. So when it comes to compliance, no one gets it more than US Cloud. ISO, GDPR, and ESG compliance are not just regulatory requirements, but strategic imperatives that drive operational efficiency, legal compliance, risk management, and corporate reputation. These standards foster trust and loyalty among customers and stakeholders, attract investment, and ensure long-term sustainability and success in a competitive global market. Visit uscloud.com and book a call today to find out how much your team can save. That's uscloud.com and book a call today and get faster Microsoft support for less. All right, everyone, we are back with Dr. Lynn Rothschild, who is a research scientist at the NASA Ames Research Center and has been an adjunct professor at Stanford University and is currently an adjunct professor at Brown University because she's smart enough to do both those things at once. And primarily as an astrobiologist focusing on the origin of evolution of life on Earth and elsewhere, and a whole bunch of other fascinating things we're going to talk about. Hello, Lynn, and welcome to the show. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thanks so much for inviting me, Rod. I'd love to be able to talk about all the fun things we're doing.
Well, the article that caught my attention, of course, as you know, is about making off-world habitats from mushroom fungus, which is, of course, treated in various ways, which I'm sure generated a bunch of really fascinating headlines when the article first came out, but we'll try to control ourselves. But I guess the center point that I saw in your list of various things that you do is called synthetic biology. Can you sort of explain to us what that is?
Absolutely. So the way I look at it is, for centuries, people did descriptive chemistry, for example. And then about 150, 200 years ago, people started making new things, literally calling it synthetic chemistry. And I believe that we have a parallel in the biological world, that for literally thousands of years, humans have been describing the biological world, whether it's looking at trees or lions or whatever, or going at a molecular level, but they're describing what has already been evolved. Synthetic biology is making something new with biology, whether it's altering a current organism or actually trying to make a new organism from scratch.
Okay. I think that gives it to us.
That sounds like mad doctor science right there. So
it does. And I just want to mention that,
in a way,
Lynn, that you got, was it 5 NIAC grants or 6?
I have had 5 phase 1s, 2 phase 2s, and 1 phase 3, which the running joke is that makes me the queen of NIAC.
Yeah. So for those in the audience who don't know, NIAC is the NASA Advanced Innovation What's the C stand for? I forgot.
NASA Innovative Advanced Concepts.
Innovative Advanced
NASA
Concepts. Thank
Innovative
you.
Advanced Concepts
There we go.
program,
NIAC.
which, yeah, it's my absolute favorite program at headquarters, not just because they fund me, but because they are thinking the 20 to 30 year in advance time frame. There are many programs, and not just NASA, but throughout the world, where the focus is, what's going to happen in the next quarter, or maybe, you're doing something like weather forecasting in the next day or two. Whereas NIAC is one of the few programs that really takes that long vision and says, if we are going to change the world in 20 to 30 years, what is it going to take that we need to do now to see if there really is a there, and then start to develop it to see where the pitfalls might be, or maybe this was a wild idea that's not going to go anywhere.
Well said. And I'd have to add, I participated in 2 NIAC workshops as a minor figure, and it's amazing. The people there are amazing. It's an incredibly smart group in the case where I was involved, and I felt like a Labrador retriever sitting in the corner watching smart people do things I didn't understand.
Can I jump in? Can I jump in real quick? Because we're starting to get into like sciencey, techie, sci-fi stuff like really, really fast. And I did want to ask you, Lynn, real quick, what your path to space really was, like what brought you to synthetic biology, like in the first place, and were you bitten by the space bug like as a kid, or is it something that you found yourself into? I usually like to start out with that kind of intro question there.
Oh my goodness, there's so many ways to answer this, but I am just going to blow people's minds. Yes, I am absolutely ancient. Sputnik and I are very close. And so, yes, I do remember Neil Armstrong stepping on the moon. I remember as a kid at summer camps managing to talk the director of the camp into finding a little TV and staying up half the night with her, bless her heart, and being really excited. But I never thought that I would be at NASA. I got bitten by the bug of microbiology by looking through a microscope when I was 8, seeing an amoeba, and that was it. And so sort of fast forward, I ended up doing a PhD on the evolution of photosynthesis, gave a talk at Harvard shortly afterwards. And my host said, "Did you know that NASA would have funded that?" And I looked at him and I said, "That's the space agency. You do understand that?" I said, No, you don't understand that they have a program to look for life in the universe. And so they need to be able to understand the evolution of life on planet Earth. And so I suspected that for many years and finally confirmed he sent NASA my name. And next thing I knew, I was getting advertisements for postdoctoral fellowships. And anyway, cut to the chase is I got one, and that was in the end of the 80s. And I thought maybe that would be something fun for a year or two, particularly since it was post-Viking. And so it was not really a great time for biologists to be looking for life in the universe. The feeling was after the Viking missions to Mars that the biologists had given it their best shot and it was dead. And it's time for the geologists, the big boys, to come in. And then all sorts of really cool things happened by the end of the 90s. The discovery of extrasolar planets was ramping up. The really advances in molecular biology were ramping up. The discovery of ALH 84001, the Mars meteorite that some people thought had evidence that potentially there was extinct life on Mars. And all these things sort of came together with the really visionary view of our administrator at the time, Dan Golden, who really kickstarted a program in astrobiology. And I got hired, and here we are decades later, and I'm still at NASA with one of the best jobs in the world. That being said, you asked about synthetic biology. So I could have spent the rest of my life happily looking for Martians, which is sort of the shorthand at cocktail parties. But what happened was about 15 or so years ago, our center director at the time had gotten wind of this thing called synthetic biology and felt that this was going to be the future, particularly as an enabling technology for getting humans off planet. And it's something that I was totally unaware of, but in my checkered career, I do happen to have gotten a PhD in cell and molecular biology. And so he thought it would be a good idea to put a graduate student in my lab in that area. And he directed me to start a program in synthetic biology for NASA. And so off I was to the races. Of course, the first question was, as you asked, what is synthetic biology? What am I doing? But it's turned out to be an incredibly cool thing. It's not completely taken over my life. My lab is somewhat balanced between the two areas, and there's obviously interaction between the two. The synthetic biology is an enabling tool for astrobiology, astrobiology as an enabling tool for synthetic biology. But what's really sort of interesting is synthetic biology, unlike astrobiology, is something that is really going to revolutionize a lot of what goes on planet Earth, whether you're talking about agriculture or medicine or, on and on and on. It is really important. And so it is a technology that is unusual for NASA to have any sort of relationship to. Usually when we're involved in technologies, we are the big gorilla in the room. The heat shields, the supercomputers, the wind tunnels, the, propulsion systems. We are, the world's leaders in this. Synthetic biology, because there's so many Earth-based applications, I don't believe we will ever be the leaders in it, but we are, I hate to use the word fast followers, but we can exploit what's going on in these different areas in ways that no one else can. I've been representing NASA on a government synthetic biology working group for over 10 years now. And about once every 2 years, I try to describe myself as we're the Ginger Rogers of synthetic biology. So for those of you who remember the comment that, Sarah was such a great dancer, and Ginger Rogers, the point was she had to do everything Fred Astaire did except backwards in high heels. And I feel that's exactly what we are for synthetic biology. We have to do everything that the Department of Agriculture and NIH and everyone else does, except, you have oxygen? How nice. You have gravity? No can do. And so we are sort of, I feel we're the Ginger Rogers of synthetic biology, but you have to be a certain age to really appreciate that.
Yeah. I was just going to say, there's a whole cadre of people that are going, what's a Ginger Rogers? Is that something? Is that like a cookie?
You better look. And I would say to those people, start Googling. You're missing something.
Right. So what really got our attention, of course, was this article I saw from NASA Ames on your work on creating potential Martian habitats out of fungus. Mushrooms, essentially, but actually the roots of mushrooms, as it were, which was just, it was kind of a transformative moment. I thought, I think this is the most brilliant thing I've seen in at least 10 years. It's just so far, it's not in left field, but to where most of us are thinking about, aluminum and titanium enclosures buried under a bunch of dirt on the Martian surface or something. It's really quite extraordinary. So I'll let you kind of jump into describing that however you wish. But I thought what was also fascinating was, if I understood it correctly, that the project got its start for some students that were trying to figure out how they might grow a drone on another planet. Is that right?
Wow.
That is absolutely correct. Boy, have you done your homework. So for about 10 years, I was the faculty advisor for a synthetic biology team for a competition called iGEM, which is the International Genetically Engineered Machine Competition. These are primarily teams of undergraduates. As you mentioned, I've had faculty positions at both Brown and Stanford, so I had a combined group of students from both universities, with some input over the years from Princeton and Spelman and so on. Anyway, so one year I challenged them to make a biodegradable drone for this competition. And anyway, I could give you lots of stories, but cut to the chase that the parts that they were being judged on did not involve the main body of the drone. And obviously you cannot make a drone, the polite way to call it is actually uncrewed aerial system or uncrewed aerial vehicle, not drone. But anyway,
yeah.
And so it needed a body. And I had a student on the team who is a dual degree student with the Rhode Island School of Design and Brown University. And he was the one, in fairness, had heard about a company called Ecovative that was in the business of making mycelial products, and they still are a leader in the field. So basically, when you look at a mushroom, you're just looking at the fruiting body of a large group of we call filamentous fungi, ones that have filaments. So not things like yeast that make your bread or beer that are single cells, but ones that form filaments. And out in nature, they bind soil, they bind and eat decaying wood. In fact, they're the ones responsible for the decaying. So they do all sorts of things that you can't necessarily see. And many of them then produce fruiting bodies that pop up overnight called mushrooms, and they are important for their reproduction. But this main part of the fungus, these filaments called the mycelium, do this binding anyway. They're really good at that. And so Ecovative took advantage of that to bind wood chips and start to make packing material and other sorts of sort of cool things. And so this student thought, well, that would be a great way to make the body of a biodegradable drone, because in essence, it would only be made out of wood chips and fungal material. And so they made this, and I must say I was somewhat oblivious to what he was doing. And then that particular project went viral in the media, which it was an interesting lesson in the power of the media. Anyway, long and the short is it made me really focus on that aspect. When Ecovative called me the next day, it's like, what's going on? Anyway, long and the short is that made me start to think, well, if you could make the body of a drone, maybe you could use the same approach to make a habitat off planet. And the beauty of this would be you would not be carrying up these huge steel structures. A lot of the cost of a space mission is lifting things off of Earth's gravity well. If you've seen a launch, even on television, you see a lot of the mass of the rocket is released just in the first few minutes. It's because so much of the fuel goes into just getting us off planet. So anytime you can shave ounces, grams, kilograms off of the payload, you have increased your mission capability. And obviously, while steel is very reliable, it's going to be a very heavy way to go. And so you've got the weight problems that are going to compromise your mission. Then you've got the issues that you really can't conform to whatever's there. If you put a prefab steel house on a building site, you better have had the excavators there and everything else, not, oops, there's a crater there. What are we going to do now? So you can't really conform to the building site. And it's not really all that, psychologically friendly. I don't know about you. I don't really want to live in a stainless steel house. It's one thing to go into an office like it, but it's another thing to live in. And so all these reasons, plus the fact that the fungal mycelia can solve all of those problems, it also is actually very good acoustically. It's very low flammability. And so I thought, well, gosh, what if you just make an inflatable? I sort of imagine like one of those jumpy things that the kids use at the, in the summer at fairs and so on. Right. What if you have an inflatable that's seeded fungal mycelia and maybe even dehydrated wood chips, and you send it off planet and you let it inflate with a little oxygen? It won't take much because the pressure's so low on the moon or Mars. And then you have the mycelia growing. You add a little water and it grows to bind maybe dehydrated wood chips or some kind of aerogel or whatever. And then you literally are growing your habitat on site. Huh. And once you buy into that vision, you realize you could do rover shells. You could build tables and chairs and beds and basically almost anything. I mean, it really boggles the mind, but we have this vision that I think is very compelling. Fortunately, at that point, as I was starting to develop this vision, I met Chris Maurer, who's the principal architect at Red House Studios in Cleveland, and he was starting to look at the idea of using fungi to build houses on the Earth. And I said, I have this crazy idea. What about using this to build habitats off planet? And he looked at me and said, I had the same crazy idea. And we decided to go in on this together. So we wouldn't be where we are today if it weren't for Chris working with me, because he's both a powerhouse working with actually making the ideas a reality, plus he has the architectural experience. I can't, as a scientist, just say, oh, you just blow up this thing and people live in it. The NIAC program has pushed us. What are you going to do in terms of heat? What are you going to do in terms of plumbing? What are you going to, that's not my job. That's what an architect is really brilliant at. But again, he has just been amazing. So it's, I want to give him a huge shout out.
So years ago, I guess gosh, it was in the early 80s, I think. I went to a talk at Caltech by Dr. Robert Forward, who is kind of famous for being an out-of-the-box thinker, and he was talking to the group about someday we'll grow rockets like we grow carrots, and everybody in the audience sort of snickered and looked around like, oh, what's this guy smoking? But, we could be on the cusp of that. We're going to jump to a quick break, and we'll be right back, so stand by. This episode of This Week in Space is brought to you by Veeam. Without your data, your customers' trust turns to digital dust. That's why Veeam's data protection and ransomware recovery ensures that you can secure and restore your enterprise data wherever and whenever you need it, no matter what happens. As the #1 global market leader in data resilience, Veeam is trusted by over 77% of the Fortune 500 to keep their businesses running with digital disruptions like ransomware strike. That's because Veeam lets you back up and recover your data instantly across your entire cloud ecosystem, proactively detect malicious activity, remove the guesswork by automating your recovery plans and policies, and get real-time support from ransomware recovery experts. Listen, data is the lifeblood of your business, so get data resilient with Veeam. Go to veeam.com to learn more. That's VEEAM.com. And we're back, Tarek. I can see that you have a question burning in you like a flame.
I just want to make a couple of things clear, I think, outright, because I know two things about, mycelium and mushrooms. Number one, they make houses for Smurfs. And also, that's like how the USS Discovery gets around in Star Trek Discovery. But it sounds like, Lynn, this kind of an approach to you're calling it, is it myco-architecture, the architecture?
Right.
So it's not that
we call it myco-architecture. Yeah, just to be clear, mycology is the technical word for the study of fungi. So the myco is from the fungi, and the texture is from the architecture. I believe that's called portmanteau. So that's how we came up with the word myco-texture, building with fungi.
I love it. And so I guess, as I understand you, like the fungi are like, they're like inside this frame. So you could prefab an inflatable frame for whatever you would need, and maybe even like component parts, and then just grow that. But is it really like tough? I mean, I imagine if astronauts are going to live on the moon or on Mars, they're going to need like a hardy kind of a thing. How strong, I guess, in your studies, have you found that this material can get, I guess, to safeguard astronauts over time?
So I am so glad you brought that up, because it is what we call tunable material. So when you just grow fungal mycelia on, say, something like sawdust, you end up with something that looks and kind of feels like you'd left a piece of whole wheat bread out on the counter for 3 weeks. So it's sort of this dry, lightweight, brownish thing, and you think, I'm not going to build anything out of that. So it depends partly what you're binding and partly the post-processing. So we've been able to get fungal mycelia to bind sand. That's easy with a little nutrient added. Lunar regolith simulant, Martian regolith simulant. So sort of the best we have on the Earth that simulates these planets. And so obviously, if you're binding together the surface material from a planet or sand, you're getting something much harder. We also use it to bind together wood chips. Now, my students made me a little stool that you can find on the internet out of wood chips. It took about 2 weeks for the fungi to bind it. And then it wasn't, much harder than a piece of stale bread. So they then baked it for, I believe it was about 12 hours at a high temperature. And then it ended up being incredibly hard and strong. In fact, I can stand on it, and it's gotten to be a tourist attraction in our life. I can say, people line up to get their photo taken standing on it. It's kind of the funniest thing. This was built by another iGEM team of mine in 2018 that was specifically looking at myco-architecture off planet when we were just getting started on this project. So yeah, you can really tune the materials. In fact, there's another new colleague of mine at the University of Alaska who uses an approach where he makes a foam out of the fungal mycelia, and has gotten a lot of funding to make this material as a substitute for styrofoam to ship frozen fish in out of Alaska. And I saw him 2 weeks ago. This is absolutely incredible stuff. So you can range from basically a styrofoam substitute all the way to a really hard building material that you would think was a piece of particle board or harder.
That's just crazy.
When this company starts up, I'm definitely buying in. Sorry, Tarek, go ahead. I know you have a follow-up.
No, it's funny. I actually, I thought that this whole technology sounded familiar, and I went back in the space.com archives, and I found
an article on it.
I found a headline that my colleague Megan Bartels wrote. I think she spoke with you, Lynn, where it was called "There Could Be Fungus Among Us on Mars," with this astronaut house idea. So. But
the guy who says he never does clickbait.
Hey. That might not be the first time we use fungus among us either. Because I think it's fun to say. But hey. I was thinking about... go ahead.
Yeah, sort of give another plug. That was when we were just getting started. And as I mentioned with the NIAC program, their phase ones are really looking to see if there is a there. And somehow we managed to convince them there was a there, and that there certainly was a lot of prep interest, which is not true of every project because many of them are very difficult to understand. I sit there at the meetings every year, so I know I have difficulty with many of them with the engineering and the technology.
Yeah.
So we then tried to get a phase 2, which is really to see if there's something there worth developing. And it took us 3 tries. And we did finally get that. And then for the phase 3, which is very unusual, they've only given 3 or 4. They maybe give 1 a year. They really want to see that you can start to move this on, that there's someone who's interested. And so we've started working with one of the NASA seed-funded commercial space stations, Starlab, which is interested in using this approach for paneling inside their space station. As well as potentially in the astronaut habitats for the beds and the tables and so on that I mentioned to you. And we are also working towards trying to get a mission where we show that this can work on the surface of Mars. I'm sorry, please. I mean, of course, the moon.
Yeah.
I would love to get to the surface of Mars. Don't know how to do that right now to talk NASA into that. But there is a way to get to the surface of the moon. And it requires a very competitive proposal, but I am determined that is going to be the mic drop of my career. We're going to show that these things work.
Well, I wanted to ask, because as a layperson, one of the things that I dread the most in my house is fungus, right? On the walls, the mildew in the bathroom or whatever, on the tile. And I've had people I know who were like impacted by black mold or whatnot, and so one of the first things that I thought about is like, what happens if astronauts breathe this stuff in? Like, is it like a very inert and a safe building material, or could it like get, I don't know, like mutate from space radiation, run amok, and then we're all running away from mutant space mycelia?
Okay.
I don't know. I have to ask the question, Rod, because people are going to want to know.
It's not Attack of the Mushroom People, I promise.
Reasonable question. The fungus that we've been primarily using is the same one that reishi is derived from. So it's a common one. People can eat it. So that's not a problem. Breathing hazard is going to be true of anything that creates, dust. You slough off skin cells every day. So that's sort of one way to answer it. Another way is that nothing is going to be able to grow on the surface of the moon or Mars because the atmospheric pressure is such that we don't have liquid water.
Yeah.
So in fact, to be able to grow any of these things, we're going to have a pressurized inflatable. And so if there is such a leak in the inflatable that people are breathing it, they're going to have a lot bigger problem to worry about than breathing fungal mycelia. They've got a leak.
Like a problem breathing at all. Yeah.
Right. But the other point is that, this is a big group of organisms. If you look at fungi, we're among the animals. There are also some not very nice animals. I am not in a position to defend what a wasp or a mosquito does, or malaria, or there are a lot of bad, actors out there. That's true of fungi. There are a lot of ones that are totally benign, and then there are ones that are pathogens. But I'm glad you brought up the black ones. That has been a problem on space stations. Mir, I think in particular, had some black fungal issues on the electronics. But that, again, totally separate from what we're doing. But the black ones are very interesting because the reason they're black is because they have a pigment called melanin, which is the same reason that our skin has pigmentation in it. No matter what color skin we are, we have some melanin in it. And the melanin protects us from radiation. It's got partial protection from ultraviolet radiation, which is why people get darker in the summer when they're exposed to radiation. And it turns out there may be some protection from ionizing, from space radiation. And so we are, as part of our phase 3, also looking at some black fungi that could potentially be used as part of this building material that would have the advantage that they could also protect the astronauts from some of the radiation that they would be subjected to in space. So it was not actually such a crazy comment. Really interesting. And yes, we're now starting to sort of incorporate or think about incorporating, due to some preliminary data, some of these heavily melanized, these black fungi.
Thank you. Thank you. You hear that, Rod? You hear that? Not crazy question. Real interesting.
Yeah. She didn't say it was an intelligent question. She just said it wasn't crazy. Okay, everybody stand by for a second. We're going to jump to a quick break, and we'll be right back. So, Lynn, one of the other things I thought was fascinating in looking into this in a little more detail was this idea of a multi-layered habitat that starts with a layer of something frozen that we find, we think, a lot of on Mars, which is water. You just have to melt it to use it, mine it and melt it. And then that, I guess, as it warms from the inside, trickles down to the second layer of the structure, which is the cyanobacteria. But then that layer, and I hope you'll correct me on this, I'm sure I'm not getting it completely right. That layer takes the water and photosynthesizes using light that shines through the ice to produce oxygen that the astronauts can breathe, the nutrients for the final inner layer of mycelia. Do I have that right?
You're really, 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 really close. So
that's what they said in calculus, but it didn't work.
Asymptotically. So my vision for actually having a really stable system, not just habitats, but a biologically enabled human colony on the moon or Mars, is to be able to take advantage of the raw materials there. And just like on Earth, we have raw materials that our planet's provided for us. Water, at the origin of life, that we had an atmosphere that was had a fair amount of carbon dioxide in it, had virtually no free oxygen, but it had nitrogen in it, and you had minerals, rocks, and so on, and various elements. So what happened was life arose and provided an interface between these raw materials and then the rest of the biological world, in particular photosynthetic organisms, ones that take light and use that energy from the sun to take those raw materials from the planet, the gases like carbon dioxide and the minerals and so on, to make organic compounds. And this is not like organic, like at the grocery store, organic section, but things that are, made from carbon, like sugars and amino acids and proteins and all the fats and all those sorts of things. So my vision is that we do the same thing off planet. Why haul up a lot of stuff? Eventually, we have a system where we have life as that interface between the raw materials off planet and then this production system. And for that, we would again go to photosynthetic organisms. So in my dream, we end up with something as you describe it, where we mine the water, or maybe we just take up a little with us. And then we have something like a cyanobacterium that can take the nitrogen and make it into something that's usable for other organisms, which turns out only a few organisms can do. It takes the carbon dioxide and turns that into sugars and proteins and so on that other organisms can use, and fats. And these then become, and as a waste product, by the way, they produce oxygen, which is how we got the oxygen that we breathe. So then those waste products of the cyanobacteria then go ahead and feed the fungi. That is my ultimate dream for this. But of course, if you're going to have humans up there, in fact, if you're going to talk anyone into taking your technology up, you're going to need to de-risk it as much as possible. So that is definitely my ultimate vision. I suspect in our earlier iterations, till people feel comfortable with this crazy idea that we're going to make habitats and furniture and stuff out of fungal mycelia, that we are going to de-risk by probably removing some of that, so that we maybe bring up some, let's say, dehydrated wood chips, which we know the fungi love. This is what they've evolved to do. And maybe just add a little water to dehydrated wood chips, and then we have the material for them to bind and their food, and they're off and running. And then sometime later, when we're more confident, we start to add the fungal, the cyanobacterial part, feeding the fungi and so on, the entire sort of system as you described it.
Can you imagine like a Mars base that needs like a fungi engineer, right? To make sure that they're growing. Oh,
I love that. I love that.
Like a chief fungi engineer, you know, like O'Brien or whatever from Star Trek.
Then we have a problem. We need our myco-architecture engineer here.
That's right. That's right.
I love it. Yes.
That's a college program you and I might have actually been able to complete. So
I tell you,
thank you for thinking it out.
Are there any, Lynn, cross contamination concerns? When I think about organisms that can metabolize carbon dioxide and put out oxygen, for example, I think about how the atmosphere of Mars is like super carbon dioxide, and that's like a big ripe food source. But I do know it's still a very harsh environment for anything that we would call living on Earth. Is that something that in the future this technology will have to contend with, either to keep it contained or to just allay fears of what we might want to find, like actual like Martian, organisms or whatnot, that we don't mess that up with anything that we bring that would be like a growing tool for a Mars base or the like.
Once again, you're absolutely on track. So switching hats, as I know it's a static picture, but you can imagine I'm switching hats now as an astrobiologist. And I believe that if there was an indigenous life on Mars and we destroyed it before we had a chance to discover it, that would be one of the greatest biological tragedies ever. I mean, we would have destroyed the chance to answer that question, are we alone, in a very, in our lifetime. So yes, we cannot just go release things on the surface of Mars, and there are treaties and planetary protection protocols. In fact, NASA has a planetary protection officer. There are COSPAR treaties and so on and so forth. So there's that aspect, but then getting back to the idea that the atmospheric pressure is such that there isn't liquid water on the surface. There could be places where there are fluid inclusions and so on, but heck, I've got students in my lab who can't grow things when they're handed a jar of culture medium. The chance of things just happening to float out and happening to grow and take over in my dreams. So that's unlikely to happen. But obviously, because of the planetary protection protocols, we do need to be extra, extra careful. That being said, once we actually have humans on Mars, human life is going to obviously be a very high priority. You can't say, well, let the 6 astronauts die because there might be life on the other side of the planet. It's just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so this is why it's so important for us to have these robotic precursors there prior to having humans on Mars. The moon is a totally different situation. It's dead. It's very, as likely as anything to have been dead forever. And so therefore, we don't have planetary protection protocols in place. So it's a great place for us to test these technologies. It's closer. It's easier to get to. It's cheaper to get to. We don't have the planetary protection. The gravity is actually worse. It's 1/6 G. It's a third G on Mars. The atmosphere is worse. Everything is worse on Mars, on the moon, except getting there for us. And so if it works on the moon, I have incredible confidence that it's going to work on Mars.
Mm-hmm. So just to continue that thought, and then we have our last break for the show. Whenever I talk to people at JPL about planetary protection with regard to, spores on rover wheels or something of that nature, they're very careful to state what the protocols are and why they're important, but in the same breath will say, but Mars is pretty hostile. It's high radiation. There's perchlorates and other things in the soil that aren't particularly helpful for growing things. And of course, where we're talking about landing, at least for these early missions, are in places that won't have liquid water or the RSLs that they thought they might have seen in slopes and so forth. So in your opinion, and I'm not asking this, I don't want to get you in trouble with anybody, but just, for the sake of conversation, do you think it's likely that something of this nature would be able to actually exist on the surface for about 15 minutes or more?
Oh, yeah. I mean, things can certainly survive on the surface. We have organisms on the Earth that can withstand vacuum, that can withstand incredibly high levels of radiation, including many of your audience probably have heard of tardigrades, which are little water bears. So they're actually they're animals. They're not even they're not even microbes. Deinococcus radiodurans is a microbe that can withstand very high levels of radiation. It's interesting that its DNA actually fragments, and then it's able to put it back together like a puzzle. So I think a lot of these things can survive. I'm really glad that you brought up perchlorates. I will totally deflect here and say that our latest NIAC is to detoxify perchlorates on Mars. Now, there are organisms on the Earth that can easily withstand the levels of perchlorates on Mars. That's not the issue. The issue is that the levels of perchlorate on Mars are toxic to humans, so you don't want them in your drinking water. It's not that there aren't organisms that can survive it. So I don't think the surface of Mars is actually self-sterilizing. And even if it were, we've done work over many years of looking at organisms under very thin layers of sand. I started doing this because I was walking on a beach in Mexico, and I turned around and my footprints were green. So even being able to live under a very thin layer of sand or dust, or the Martian regolith, will provide an enormous amount of protection. So I don't want to contradict my good friends at JPL, but I do believe that you could have organisms surviving some period of time on the surface, certainly mixed in with the regolith on the surface. I don't think that would be a problem for a lot of spores and so on. But again, the ability to divide, thrive, and so on is a totally different situation. And there you really are going to need the liquid water and organics.
Okay. We're going to jump to one more break, and then it's back to Tarek for his other burning question. We'll be right back. All right, Tarek, you have to really do something about this burning you have. Go ahead.
Okay. You said you wouldn't tell, Rod.
Sorry.
But no. I wanted to point out one thing. You were talking about tardigrades earlier, and they are also part of the mycelium network in the propulsion system of the USS Discovery, at least in season 1. So we're tying everything to Star Trek with this episode
fantasy
right now. Well, hey, we can dream, Rod. Okay. But no, I wanted to ask about some of the other things that this technology might be capable of, because it seems pretty remarkable. And Rod had a bunch of really great notes about different types of things that it could be used for, things like biomining wastewater for nutrients to try to get resources back out of that, or even using it in lighting from mycelia that might glow, that kind of a thing. It sounds like there's a lot more applications beyond just the core architecture of a habitat that you might be able to apply this technology to, with somewhat more limited resources than like what you'd have to take up to power lights or whatever overall. I mean, what are the sorts of promises that you see there?
So I'm really glad you brought that up, because we have been working on a couple of projects with fungal mycelia that could be integrated into the structure or could be an add-on and so on. And one of them that you mentioned was mining. Now, there are fungi that bind some metals to the surface. And when people talk about biomining, they usually mean changing the pH and leaching minerals out. But once we learn that some metals bind to the surface, we have this idea, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I've had this idea that you could take particular parts of proteins that bind specific metals. And at the time, we thought you could have those growing on the ends of bacteria and therefore bind metals. And then once we started in with the fungal mycelia, we thought, ooh, why not combine the projects and take proteins that will bind a specific metal and decorate them on the surface of the fungal mycelia. So instead of just waiting for them to evolve the ability to bind something, we actually decorate them with proteins that will grab whatever metal we want. And so we did do a proof of concept with that. We had a paper out a few years ago, and we just had a patent granted. So we're very excited about that. So I think now you have the ability to bind basically any metal you want. Specifically, why not combine that with the myco-architecture? So if you wanted part of your habitat metallicized for whatever reason, you could do that. You could, if you're binding metals, that means you could potentially bind other things. You could maybe detoxify the water going through. You could have a filtration system, which is, again, part of this patent. You could, I don't know. There are all sorts of things. I'm sort of laughing because my wonderful branch chief did manage to tell a company recently that I could make them a metal mushroom. I guess in principle, we could make them a metal mushroom. But you think about it, there are other sorts of things that we rely on fungi for. One thing is producing food. So you could, in principle, allow some of these fungi to form their fruiting body. So imagine you made a mycelial table, but for part of it, you allowed them to make their fruiting bodies. You could basically make your dinner on the table. It goes without saying that there are many fermented products that are based on fungi. Beer is one of them, but of course, the Japanese in particular have for centuries and centuries made fermented products out of fungi, including sake. And so I'm sorry, I have to just tell you that the very first time I mentioned this at the first NIAC meeting, and this is what happens when you're with a group of engineers, I did mention that one of the benefits is you could make sake, and someone asked me privately, that word, what did SAKE stand for again?
Oh, that's funny.
That's what happens when you sort of mix communities.
It's the acronym disease, right?
But anyway, yes. So yes, you could do a whole lot of other things once you're building with fungi because you can do remarkable things. And I say this is a new convert because my background really is with algae and protozoa, not with fungi. But I definitely can see fungi right now are having their time in the sun, mixing metaphors. And I can see that we could do really great things with them. So very bullish on that possibility.
I wanted to ask, what is an astropharmacy?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. You're asking all my favorite questions. So, so totally switching gears. Astropharmacy is another project we have that's in phase 2 in NIAC right now, and actually has some other external funding. And what we're trying to do is develop an on-demand drug production system for astronauts. Now, if you think about drugs, the pharmaceutical industry on the Earth, they're interested, obviously, in making a profit. They're interested in things that many people need. An orphan drug in the United States is 20,000 or fewer Americans who need that particular drug, and so they want mass market things. They also don't test to see whether their drugs are stable in space. They are not too concerned about really long-term longevity. We, however, have a totally different problem at NASA in that we are talking about very few people. We're maybe talking about 2 or 3 astronauts at a time, or maybe 6 for a Mars mission, or a few more on ISS. But when they need a particular pharmaceutical, they might need it now. There might not be a cold chain. We don't know how long drugs are good for in space. And certainly we have an issue that I don't think any of them are rated for a round trip to Mars, particularly when you add in the radiation. And so since we don't know what someone's going to need and we can't bring everything and it wouldn't last anyway, we decided to try to develop a really miniaturized system so that we could make drugs on demand in 24 hours. at very low mass.
Oh.
Now, immediately, I'm sure your audience is thinking this would have huge use on the Earth as well, as does the myco-architecture. But in this particular case, for orphan drugs, for remote areas, point of care, diagnostics and treatment, and so on. In fact, I was at UCSF last Friday for a cancer meeting, which they were particularly interested in the astropharmacy for possible cancer therapeutics. So, I mean, this has been a really interesting ride because I'm not an architect. I'm not a pharmacist. I don't, I'm not a specialist in a lot of these things, but what I've gotten, I am a reasonably good biologist. And what I've gotten reasonably good at is looking at where NASA's needs are. And from what I know of the biological world, is there a way that we can use life to solve these problems? And so that's what I've been trying to do, whether it's detoxifying perchlorates or building with myco-architecture, or developing an astropharmacy, or we've had projects making DNA into wires, 1 or 2 atoms thick, or we've done work with bioprinting. We've had a lot of what I think are really cool projects, taking really the cutting edge of what's going on in the biological world in terms of the technology, but maybe very old technology that evolution came up with 3 billion years ago, and seeing how that could be torqued for our needs at NASA.
Well, you kind of had a touched on something that I was going to. Well, it kind of sparked an idea. You talk about the discussions you were having at the cancer meeting. No, it's a good one, because we've been talking a lot about building off-world, right, on the moon, on Mars. Systems that astronauts might need to survive. And it is hard to get to space, Lynn, right? And it seems like all of the technologies that you're looking at here are ones that would be really helpful if we were just using them for, like, I think about low-cost housing, right? That you could use this to build low-cost housing for people that might need that. You could use it to get like the remote medications to people that might need them. I mean, it seems to have spin-offs or uses that we should be using this stuff on Earth right now, right? Why aren't we? Or is it that it's so tailored for space?
So two answers. One is that yes, we should be. And again, I'd shout out to Chris Maurer. We discussed the idea of using it for refugee shelters. And the next thing I knew, he had founded a nonprofit in Namibia where they are actually building shelters and homes using fungal mycelia approach that we've been using here. He's starting to work on something that he's calling Biocycler in Cleveland. So absolutely. My job is not to do the terrestrial-based applications, but I'm thrilled when we do have terrestrial spinoffs. But that does bring to a really important question that I'm asked all the time. Well, we have problems on the Earth. Why are you working on, off planet? This is silly. And besides the fact that our budget is minuscule compared to the other, I firmly believe that we have a role in this, that right now, if you look at the Earth's problems, whether it's sustainability or climate or housing or medication and so on, there is already an existing solution. So if I were starting a company, for example, or if I wanted to change the world, I have to dislodge a current plan. I have to come up with the money. I've got to have an investor that believes in me and so on. There is no existing infrastructure on the moon or Mars. You're starting with a blank slate. And even better for sustainability, there is no petrochemical industry because there is no oil on either planet. Yeah. So you can really start fresh and think, okay, if I were starting fresh, what would be the best idea that I could come up with this? Even though right now it may not be the most economically viable on Earth in particular. And so I have a little bit more breathing room to try to develop these ideas that I think are really cool and will ultimately revolutionize the world. And so if we're able to prove that we can do this, or at least start to get this development money, I'm hoping that other people will see that this is incredibly important for the Earth. In fact, we've already had one spinoff from my lab looking at some of the biomining technologies. And I mentioned the work that Chris is doing in Namibia and Cleveland, where he happens to be located. I believe a lot of these things will have spinoffs. Perchlorate, it turns out there's not much perchlorate problem on the Earth, but it is used in aircraft fuel. And so there is the occasional spill and a problem with detoxifying. So yes, I do care very much about this planet. This, in spite of people in the press trying to push me elsewhere, this is my favorite planet. This is my home. I want us to be successful. I want to do good. But I think by using the conceit of thinking about how we get people off planet, I think that is allowing me the space and the freedom to really think of revolutionary ideas and start to develop them in a way that I couldn't any other way.
Well, that's a great summary, and I think that's a perfect place to wrap up. I want to thank everybody for joining us today for episode 132, which we like to call Living in Martian Mushrooms, with Dr. Lynn Rothschild from the NASA Ames Research Center. Lynn, where's the best place for us to keep up with these exciting programs you've been talking about?
Oh, gosh. I'm not always as good at publishing. Chris is very good about LinkedIn and tweeting about the Myco-architecture work. Hopefully I don't know. I don't really know the best answer for that. I do apologize, but we do try to get things out there. And I know the NIAC program is particularly, careful about making sure that we have reports up there on their website and so on that people certainly can look at. Get in touch with me if that's turns out to be the best way to do it.
Okay, and I'll put a link to NIAC in the show notes online. Tarek, where can we find you fruiting your spores these days?
Well, when you put it like that, Rod, no. Well, you can find me at space.com, as always, on the Twitter. I guess X, I keep forgetting to call it that, at Tarek J. Malik. This weekend, I will have my eyes to the sky to try to see comet, I'm going to get it wrong, Chindlin Atlas 3, the comet that's up there right now. And hopefully if we get this G4 solar storm, maybe some more auroras again too. And new Lego Fortnite season. So new pass for Halloween. Looking forward to Fortnitemares.
I just want to see one aurora someday before I kick the bucket here. And of course, you can find me at pilebooks.com or at astromagazine.com. Please remember, you could drop us a line at twis@twit.tv. That's TWIS@twit.tv. We always welcome your comments, and at least one of us, usually me, will answer your email because we love you as much as we hope you love us.
Because Rod's a doll like that. So,
gee, thanks. Almost nobody says that. New episodes of this podcast publish every Friday on your favorite podcatcher, so make sure to subscribe, tell your friends, and give us reviews. We'll take whatever you got, but 5 of whatever that unit is would be appreciated. Also, don't forget, you can get all the great programming with video on the Twit Network ad-free on Club Twit, as well as some extras that are only available there for just $7 a month. I mean, the only other thing you can get that's great for about $7 is a pound of your favorite mushrooms. But, alternate between that and Club Twit. We'd appreciate it. And it helps us stay here and do what we do. Finally, you can follow the Twit Tech Podcast Network at Twit on Twitter and on Facebook and twit.tv on Instagram. Thank you very much, everybody. Lynn, thank you so much for coming. This has been one of the most interesting interviews I think we've had. And I just love what you're doing. It's really sensational.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next week.